Have you ever wondered what would happen if two ordinary people from a small American town were suddenly gifted unimaginable power? Would they rise as heroes or fall prey to their darkest desires? In the 1990s, in the quiet town of Millhaven, a young tailor named Jason Miller dreamed of leaving his small-town life behind to chase the American dream. Millhaven, nestled deep in the heart of Illinois, was a place where everyone knew each other's secrets, or so they thought. Jason had spent years perfecting his craft, working tirelessly in the backroom of his father Vernon Miller's tailor shop. His dream of opening a high-end boutique in New York City was finally within reach, as he had been saving for years to fund his visa application. But life in Millhaven wasn't simple, especially when it came to matters of the heart. Jason was deeply in love with Sarah Sloan, the daughter of Sheriff Scott Sloan. Their love was the kind of small-town romance that blossomed in secret, hidden from disapproving eyes. Sheriff Sloan had other plans for Sarah. She was already promised to Andy Johnson, a wealthy businessman from a neighboring town. To complicate things further, Andy's ex-girlfriend, Brianna Bruce Lee, still harbored feelings for him and was bitterly resentful of Sarah. On the other side of town, a social outcast named Shane Bishop lived in the shadows. Shane had always been in love with his childhood friend, Emily Dawson, who worked at the Millhaven Diner and was raising her young daughter Lily on her own. Emily's brother, Danny Dawson, worked as a tailor under Jason's father, Vernon. Despite Shane's affection, Emily only saw him as a remnant of a painful past she wanted to forget. But Emily's world was falling apart. Lily's health was deteriorating, and the family couldn't afford the costly surgery she desperately needed. On Christmas Eve, a freak storm swept through Millhaven. Lightning crackled in the sky, illuminating the town's frozen streets. Jason and Shane, miles apart, found themselves caught in the storm. In a split second, lightning struck them both simultaneously, leaving them unconscious. When they awoke, they felt different. Jason discovered he could move objects with his mind, a power that both thrilled and terrified him. His nephew, Joey, believed the lightning had turned him into something extraordinary, and Jason began to see his abilities as a chance to change his life. Shane, however, saw his newfound telekinetic powers as a means to finally gain the love and respect he had always craved. His first act was to intervene at the diner when Emily was being harassed by a group of drunks. Shane's display of power left the town buzzing, but Emily remained distant, her past grievances with him too deep to overcome. Jason's plans to move to New York came crashing down when Sheriff Sloan revealed a family secret. Jason wasn't Vernon's biological son but the son of Martin Woods, a long-forgotten theater actor who had died tragically years ago. The revelation shattered Jason, leaving him feeling unmoored and betrayed. Fueled by anger and a need for vengeance, Jason adopted the persona of Thunderbolt, a character from one of Martin's unfinished plays. Disguised under a makeshift costume, he began targeting those who had wronged him, leaving behind cryptic clues that hinted at his involvement. Sheriff Sloan wasn't the only one with secrets that night. Danny Dawson, desperate to save his niece Lily, had secretly stolen Jason's savings, the money he had been putting aside for his visa application. With it, Danny paid for Lily's surgery, unaware of the storm of consequences his actions would unleash. Jason, now fully immersed in his Thunderbolt persona, discovered the theft when he went to retrieve his money from the tailor shop. The betrayal cut deep. Consumed by rage, he confronted Danny, their argument echoing through the quiet streets of Millhaven. Words turned to shouts and shouts to silence as Jason stormed out, leaving Danny behind to grapple with his own guilt. Unaware of Danny's actions, Shane sought his own twisted path to justice. Determined to win Emily's heart, he robbed the Millhaven Savings Bank, using his telekinetic powers to disable security cameras and guards. His hope was to present the stolen money as a solution to Emily's financial troubles, a misguided attempt to prove his worth. But when Emily learned of his crime, her disdain for him only deepened. The tension in Millhaven reached a breaking point on a bitter January evening. Shane, in a fit of jealous rage, set fire to the miller's tailor shop, unaware that Danny was still inside. The flames consumed the building, leaving nothing but ash and tragedy in their wake. Danny's death sent shockwaves through the town, with rumors swirling about who could be responsible. Jason, devastated by the loss and now framed for the fire, turned to Brianna for help. Though their connection had always been tenuous, he revealed his secret identity to her, seeking an ally in his quest to clear his name. Brianna, intrigued by his story and yearning for a sense of purpose, agreed to help. Meanwhile, Shane, now fully embracing his role as a dark avenger, continued to spiral. His obsession with Emily drove him to greater extremes, culminating in a confrontation that left her home in ruins. The explosion claimed the lives of both Emily and Lily, leaving Shane broken but resolute in his belief that the world owed him for his pain. The town of Millhaven, reeling from these tragedies, found itself on edge as Shane's reign of terror grew. His powers, unchecked and fueled by grief, turned him into a force of destruction. It wasn't long before the police, overwhelmed and desperate, turned to Jason, recognizing that he was the only one capable of stopping Shane. In the heart of Millhaven's small church, Shane staged his final act of vengeance. He held the congregation hostage, including Joey and other townsfolk, using his powers to instill fear and chaos. Jason, donning a makeshift supersuit, arrived to confront him. What unfolded next was a battle of wills and powers, a clash between two men shaped by pain and betrayal. Jason's initial attempts to reason with Shane fell on deaf ears, and their fight spilled into the streets, shaking Millhaven to its core. As they fought, Jason found strength in the memory of his biological father, Martin Woods, whose sacrifice and spirit now guided him. With a final surge of power, Jason overpowered Shane, ending his path of destruction. The town, once fractured by secrets and loss, began to heal, united in their gratitude for Jason's heroism. Though the scars of Millhaven's darkest days would linger, Jason, now known as Thunderbolt, pledged to protect his town from future threats. As the sun rose over the charred remains of his old life, Jason stood tall, ready to embrace the legacy his father had left behind. Jason stood on the edge of Millhaven's outskirts, staring into the distance as the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon. The storm had passed, but the town was far from healed. The air was thick with sorrow, the kind that clung to the bones and whispered through the streets like a constant reminder of what had been lost. It had been weeks since the final confrontation with Shane, but for Jason the echoes of that battle still rang loud in his ears. He had done what he could. The people of Millhaven had shown their gratitude, but Jason knew that heroism wasn't measured by applause or gratitude. It was measured in sacrifice, in the quiet moments where no one was watching, in the promises made in the face of uncertainty. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. Thunderbolt had become something more than just a persona. It was a symbol not just of justice but of hope. Brianna, now standing beside him, had become a constant presence in his life. She had helped him unravel the mystery of Danny's death, piecing together the story that was buried beneath lies, betrayal, and guilt. Together they had discovered the truth about Shane's actions, his descent into madness fueled by his twisted need for redemption. The more they learned about Shane, the more Jason saw the reflection of his own pain and anger in him. They were two sides of the same coin, both shaped by loss, both driven by a desire for justice, but it was Shane's lack of restraint, his inability to forgive, that had ultimately led to his downfall. Brianna had proven to be more than just an ally. She had become his anchor, the one person who saw him for who he truly was. The person who had walked through the darkness beside him and had never once faltered. Jason had told her everything, about his father, his past, the burdens he carried, and the secrets that had haunted him for years. Brianna, in return, had shared her own wounds, the scars of a past she'd kept hidden for too long. The bond between them had grown stronger with each passing day, their connection now unshakable. As they walked through the streets of Millhaven, Jason couldn't help but notice the subtle shifts in the town. The whispers had faded. The rumors had died down. People were beginning to rebuild. But there was still a palpable tension in the air, a feeling that things would never truly be the same. Jason's heart ached for the lives that had been torn apart, the lives that had been lost. For Emily and Lily, for Danny and the others who had perished in the wake of the chaos. And yet, for the first time since the tragedy had struck, Jason felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, after everything, they could rebuild. Perhaps the scars of Millhaven's past could fade, if only slowly, if only with time. Brianna's voice broke through his thoughts. "Jason," she said softly, "I think we both know the hardest part is still ahead." He nodded, meeting her gaze. "I know." The truth was there was no easy way forward. No matter how much the town had healed, no matter how much Jason had done to stop Shane, the scars of the past would always linger. The truth about what had happened, the betrayal, the secrets, the lies, would haunt him no matter how far he ran from it. But for the first time, Jason felt ready to face it. Ready to confront the things that had defined his life for far too long. The future was uncertain, but Jason wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the world. Not of the pain. Not of the fear that had once gripped him so tightly. He had a responsibility now. To Millhaven. To the people who had supported him. To the memory of his father, Martin Woods. And most of all, to himself. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Millhaven had started to return to a semblance of normalcy, but the shadow of the past continued to hover over it. Jason, now a recognized figure in the town, had become something of a legend. Thunderbolt, the man who saved Millhaven. But the weight of that title was heavy. Heroism, it seemed, was never a simple thing. It came with a price Jason was beginning to understand more fully with each passing day. One evening, while the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the town in an orange glow, Jason sat alone on the roof of the old mill. It was a place he had often gone to think, to clear his mind, and now it felt like the only place he could truly be himself. Away from the expectations, away from the questions. Just him and the quiet sound of the wind. It was there that Brianna found him. "Long day?" she asked, sitting down beside him, her presence comforting as always. Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You could say that." They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of their thoughts pressing down on them both. Brianna had always been able to sense when something was on his mind, when he was struggling with the burden of his responsibilities. And now, it seemed, was no different. "What's going on, Jason?" Brianna asked, her voice gentle but insistent. "I can tell something's bothering you." Jason looked over at her, his eyes tired, his expression pensive. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this anymore. The hero stuff, I mean." Brianna raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You've done more than most people could even imagine. You saved Millhaven. You stopped Shane. You protected people when they needed it the most." "But it's not enough," Jason muttered. "People still look to me as their savior, as Thunderbolt. And I don't know how to live up to that. I didn't ask for this, Brianna. I didn't want any of this." Brianna placed a hand on his shoulder. "But you did it, Jason. You faced your demons. You took responsibility. You protected this town. You can't keep blaming yourself for things you didn't choose." "I know," Jason whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "But what happens when I can't protect them anymore? What happens when the next threat comes and I'm not strong enough?" Brianna's eyes softened and she leaned in closer. "You don't have to do it alone." Jason turned to face her, their eyes locking. For the first time in a long while, he felt the weight on his shoulders ease slightly. Brianna was right. He didn't have to face everything alone. He had her. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The wind rustled through the trees as they sat together, two people who had found each other in the midst of chaos, their bond forged through fire and loss. The night stretched on, but for the first time in a long while, Jason didn't feel quite as lost. He wasn't Thunderbolt in that moment. He was just Jason, a man trying to figure out his place in a world that had been turned upside down. And maybe that was the most heroic thing of all. The months that followed were a blur of rebuilding and reflection. Millhaven had experienced its darkest days, but now the town was slowly coming back to life. The fires had been extinguished, the rubble cleared, and the people, once lost in the chaos of fear and grief, began to find their way back to normal. It was a quiet, slow process, but it was happening. Jason stood once more on the roof of the old mill, but this time, there was no weight pressing down on his chest. He had come to realize that being Thunderbolt didn't mean he had to carry the world on his shoulders. He could protect the town, yes, but he didn't have to do it alone. Brianna had shown him that. She had proven to him that true strength wasn't just in powers or titles, it was in the connections you made and the people who stood by your side. Brianna had stayed by his side throughout everything. She had been his anchor when the world felt like it was spinning out of control. Together they had worked to rebuild the town, to help the people of Millhaven find hope again. She had become his closest confidant, his partner, and, in time, something more. One evening, as they walked through the streets of Millhaven together, Jason noticed how much the town had changed. The people were out, talking, laughing, rebuilding their homes and businesses. The once quiet streets were now filled with the buzz of life. It was a new beginning not just for the town but for Jason as well. He had come to terms with the fact that he wasn't just Thunderbolt anymore, he was Jason Woods, a man with a past, a man with a future, and a man who no longer had to hide behind a mask. Brianna glanced at him, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "You've done something incredible, Jason. You've given this town a second chance." Jason shook his head, looking around at the vibrant town that had been reborn. "We've all done it together. I just helped guide the way. And maybe I needed to find my own way too." "You have," Brianna said softly, reaching for his hand. "You found what matters." The touch of her hand was grounding, comforting. In her eyes, Jason saw no judgment, only acceptance. It wasn't just about the heroics anymore. It was about being real, about being himself, flaws, powers, and all. The people of Millhaven had learned that lesson too. It wasn't the powers that made someone a hero, it was their willingness to face their past, to own their mistakes, and to rise again. As the sun set over the town, casting long shadows and bathing the streets in a warm golden light, Jason felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. He had learned to forgive himself for the things he couldn't change. He had learned that the past, no matter how painful, didn't define who he was. It was the choices he made now that would shape his future. Brianna leaned into him, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you ever think about leaving it all behind? Starting fresh somewhere else?" Jason thought about it for a moment. "Sometimes. But Millhaven's my home. It always has been, even when I try to run from it. This town is where I belong, and I think I can do more here than I ever could anywhere else." Brianna smiled, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "I think you're right." They stood there for a moment, side by side, watching as the world around them continued to rebuild. The town of Millhaven was far from perfect, but it was theirs. And they were going to make it better, piece by piece. Together. Months passed and life in Millhaven settled into a new rhythm. Jason, now more comfortable with his identity as both Thunderbolt and Jason Woods, had continued to protect the town, though it no longer felt like a burden. His heroics were quieter now, less about fighting and more about helping, rebuilding, and being present for the people who needed him. Brianna had become his partner in more ways than one. She had embraced her role in helping the town, and together, they had started a small community outreach program to help those still struggling with the aftermath of the disasters. Their bond had deepened, and though they both carried the weight of their pasts, they had learned to lean on each other, building a future they could face together. Millhaven too had found its way. The scars of the past would never truly fade, but they had become part of the town's story, a story of survival, resilience, and hope. The people of Millhaven knew that even in their darkest hour, they could rebuild. They had proven that they were stronger together than they ever could be apart. And so, as the years went by, Thunderbolt, no longer a mysterious figure but a beloved hero, became a symbol not of power but of hope. And Jason Woods, the man behind the mask, found peace in the knowledge that he had not only saved Millhaven but had found a place to call home, a place where he could finally be himself.